Elon Musk disappointing investors on Tesla's earnings call, sending shares of the company lower this morning, down 4%. Musk warning that vehicle production will slow during the third quarter and noting that Tesla will continue cutting prices if rates continue to rise. He did not hesitate to blame the global economy and macro conditions for just about everything. Here's a glimpse of what he had to say.
And if somebody's got a crystal ball for the global economy, I really appreciate it if I could borrow that crystal ball. DM us. Yeah, exactly. DM me on Twitter. It should be a note on Twitter. One day it seems like the world economy is falling apart, and the next day everything's fine. I don't know what the hell's going on. To be totally frank.
Very Musk-like comments there. Yahoo Finance's Pras Subramanian was intently listening, as many of us were, and he joins us now alongside, of course, Steve Sosnick, Interactive Brokers Chief Market Strategist, for this very exciting edition of After the Call. All right, Pras, let's get into it. What's your top takeaway?
What the hell is going on, in the words of Musk?
To quote Elon Musk.
Yeah. I'm going to try to verbalize my answer like he mumbling and stumbling. Let's see. A lot going on in that call, right? We had the strong headline numbers after the bell, but then Musk immediately sort of knocking the stock with this Q3 production warning, which sort of caught people off guard. A lot of investors were commenting on that. But then riffing on a number of topics we'll get into. First off, the big focus on margins, of course. Everyone focused on, is this the margin trough? Is this where we're at? You know, they disappointed with that 18.2% overall gross margin there. So there's some talk about that was disappointing, but also, hey, the automotive gross margins actually were better than expected. So here's what Musk had to say, sort of batting away a lot of these issues on what people want to hear on margins.
Oh, man. Where's that crystal ball again? if I may, it's like, look, the short-term variances in gross margin and profitability really are minor relative to the long-term picture. Autonomy will make all of these numbers look silly.
Yeah, I mean, talking about autonomy, saying that it had like an unlimited gross margin, like 100%. So, he just sort of was like not willing to talk about those particular issues. But, a number of these came up, of course, FSD and charging. So we can talk about that. But yeah, that was a big takeaway was what he said about gross margins.
Before we get to some of the other issues, I want to zero in on FSD for a minute. Full self-driving, in other words, which is not really full self-driving, but that's, not yet.
That's the intent.
That's what they're calling it. But you still got to sit behind the wheel of your car. So he mentioned on the call, he teased out that they are having discussions with a major automaker to license that software. So when he says full autonomy is the thing, that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, that would be...
Just to make clear.
Exactly, like white labeling that product, just infinite amount of money from a licensing point of view, because you're already putting in that fixed cost to develop the product. He said that they had, it's not news that he was wanting to license the product. It was news that he said a major OEM was in initial discussion. So that was a big deal. People are sort of speculating on who that could be. Hint, hint, maybe it's his first charging partner. I don't know. We'll see. I'm not saying anything about that. But so that was one thing. Also, the Cybertruck came up a lot. People asking about that timeline. Like you said, still a bit vague, but they did say that they would deliver initial cars this year. The production was going to start this year. Tooling has begun at the factory. So it is on track. And then he said high volume production in next year. So here's what he had to say about that Cybertruck and also the demand story for that truck.
The demand is so far off the hook, you can't even see the hook. So that's really not an issue. I do want to emphasize that the Cybertruck has a lot of new technology in it, like a lot. It doesn't look like any other vehicle because it is not like any other vehicle. And the production ramp will move as fast as the slowest and least likely element of the entire supply chain and internal production.
I think when he says production ramp, everyone sort of thinks that, Elon, you've said this before about many products that have taken years to come out. Are you really going to hit that end of year goal? It seems like they're on track. They showed that one vehicle at the factory that rolled off.
But we all thought that one vehicle was the beginning of the production, and apparently it wasn't. That was just like a demo vehicle, right?
I think they call it a release candidate. It's like they roll off the line. They got to make sure the factory line's working. They didn't really get into that much, to be honest with you. So that's what I'm speculating when they said release candidate. So you're right. I mean, we don't know if that line is fully operational. So who knows?
Steve wants to jump in on this.
Go
ahead.
One question that I had was, one of the reason for the earnings beat, was $400 million in other income. Mm-hmm. What was the other income from? Did you get a good handle on it? Because I did not.
It's funny. I think that was worth, 9 cents of EPS?
Yeah.
So it would have been a miss if not for that. I'm not sure what that is.
I know, especially...
They break out solar and they break out the other businesses. I heard it might have been a currency gain, that they actually had an FX positive outcome on some currency they held, and that could have been this 9 cent.
Isn't that a problem, though, when a guy who covers the company this closely and a guy who tracks the company this closely, like Tesla, a company of that size, don't they need to be a little more transparent about what that is?
And they're basically like saying on that call, trust us, don't worry. Like, even though he says he has no crystal ball a couple of times, he makes some bold statements saying, he doesn't land on a specific date on the Cybertruck, and says basically it doesn't matter, and that Tesla is an epic long-term investment, quote.
Well, it's worked out so well so far for people who have invested in it. Okay, so let's get our sort of vibe checks from the call. Steve, I'll go to you first on that.
The vibe check is, I've been referring to Tesla as a faith-based stock for years.
Right, so that's exactly what you're saying.
That fits in completely with what you said, Diane. And he needs to keep the faithful in line. But Julie, as you said, the faithful have been rewarded. But you always need to have some sort of shiny object out there. And, Cybertruck, the Dojo computer. To me, the long and the short of it is, if they reinvent themselves as a software company, FSD, autonomy, whatever you want to call it, well, then you might be able to support the kind of enthusiasm that's priced into the stock, the 85 PE, the PEG ratio of 5, the fact that earnings haven't really grown for a growth company, then maybe down the road you can support all this. Mm-hmm. But that, to me, is why he has to keep harping on that, because making cars is not bending metal is not a particularly profitable business. It's good, it works for them, but not super well.
Well, I think that, like you mentioned, Pras, earlier, the big bet for them now, it seems like, is this focus on the software. He really seemed to hone in on that in the call, the FSD and the licensing, as you mentioned, and he talked about a big in talks with a major OEM about this. I don't know if you have any whispers about which one it is. If it may be one of the ones they've tied up with regard to the supercharging network, the North American standard now. Right. It's possible, since they already have an established base. And one thing he says he loves the small shareholder, the ones who stuck beside him through thin and thin. Does that even matter? Does it matter?
It does for Tesla. Mm-hmm. It is by far the number one most active stock on our platform, always, perpetually, like number one with a bullet. I did a little math yesterday. I think $30 trillion worth of Tesla stock has turned over this year. That's like, I think Microsoft, which is probably a similarly interesting candidate, was a fraction of that, maybe 20%, 15%. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but yeah, the small investors are the ones who prop up this valuation, because they are, going back to the faith analogy, they're the flock.
Yeah. So your gospel of Elon.
So your vibe check was good, bad, and ugly, I guess, depending on who you are, right? Like listening, it's in the eye of the beholder. What's your vibe check from the call?
I mean, I think Steve has the correct take here. I was going to go with mad, but I think you're absolutely right. I think it's good, bad, and ugly for a number of reasons. But for instance, the ugly bad could be the avoidance of the gross margin discussions. Mm-hmm. The meh could be Cybertruck is on track. And the good could be, hey, the FSD licensing discussion is going on. Steve, I got to follow up on this $30 trillion the trading of Tesla stock on the platform. I mean, is a lot of the valuation propping because of the fact that it's such a liquid stock? Like, are we giving it a premium because of liquidity?
Absolutely. I think it does get that. The options are also, that didn't even include the amount of options that trade. And of course, when the options trade, it drives the stock. It's one big ecosystem. So that definitely it plays into it. That's also, to some extent, why it sank so fast and so hard in November and December, because we had tax loss selling, and that metastasized into something worse as well. So yeah, I mean, as this discussion shows, everything Tesla gets magnified. It's polarizing. It's the fifth largest company, by market cap, but it is by far the number one in terms of mind space.